This conference will now be recorded.
The live stream is going and you can proceed, Dr. Bechtel.
I thought we would go on now with settlement agreements, and we'll move to NLDO. Do I hear a motion to ratify the proposed step one consent agreement with NLDO? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Schottenstein, do I have a second?
Second, Dr. Cockrell.
Well, thank you. We'll have a roll call vote on Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Gaccalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, yes. We'll now turn to BDL MD. Do our motion to ratify the proposed consent agreement with BDL MD. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Schottenstein, a second?
Second, Dr. Cockrell.
Dr. Curl, thank you. We'll now have a roll call vote. Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Gaccalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Coccarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, will have to abstain in this situation. We'll now turn to BRG MD. Do you hear a motion to ratify the proposed step one consent agreement with BRG MD? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Schottenstein, a second?
Second, Dr. Cockrell.
Thank you. Roll call vote, Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Gaccalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
myself, Dr. Bechtel, yes. We'll now turn to GRB MD. Do our motion to ratify the proposed consent agreement with GRB MD. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Schottenstein, thank you. Second?
Second, Dr. Cockrell.
Roll call, Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Gaccalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, yes. We'll now turn to the matter of JITMD. Do our motion to ratify the proposed addendum to step two consent agreement with JITMD. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Schottenstein?
Second, Dr.
Second.
Cockrell.
Roll call, Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Abstain.
Mr. Gaccalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery, Montgomery, also. Yeah. Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, yes. We'll now turn to the matter of KAMD. Do I hear a motion to ratify the proposed permanent surrender / retirement with KAMD? Do I have a motion?
Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
We'll have a roll call vote. Dr. Rothermel,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Giacalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin.
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Scheinstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
thank you. Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, will have to abstain in this situation. We'll now go to notices of opportunity for hearing, orders of summary suspension, orders of immediate suspension, and orders of automatic suspension. Ms. Canepa, Deputy Director of Investigations, Enforcement, and Compliance, will now present the proposed citations to the board. Ms. Canepa?
Thank you. The first potential citation is for a B6 and B2 violations, minimal standards violations. This is in regards to 11 patients, 2 of whom died from drug interactions. Additionally, B20 violations for the administrative rules in regards to pain prescribing and intractable pain rules. The time period covered in this is from 2010 to 2019.
Yeah, I just have you go through all the different sites.
Oh, okay, just keep going through them. Okay. Number 2 is a potential citation to a respiratory care professional under 476109A18 for impairment of ability to practice based on her failure to appear for a scheduled exam, which was scheduled for January 17th of this year. This would also include a request for a summary suspension, given that the failure to appear for the exam does provide a presumption of impairment. The third one is a citation for a B34 for failure to comply with a subpoena or order issued by the board, and B13 for being convicted of misdemeanors of moral turpitude, and B5 for making false or fraudulent statements in pursuit of attempting to secure a license from the board.
Question about that one. I have a question about that one. Do we have a policy as a board about when somebody doesn't comply with a subpoena, how quickly a citation is issued? To the secretary, I mean, is there any policy?
Are you asking me, or did you say Dr. Rothermel and Dr. Safran?
I don't think they can probably answer on this one, but I didn't know if there was
I don't know that there's a policy on that, on the, expediency. I am certain that it is a case by case. A lot of times, as you can tell, that arises in the backdrop of other investigations. We wouldn't normally be issuing subpoenas unless we were investigating. And so I'm not sure that there's a set time period that we would, move forward on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Anybody else on that one? Okay. The next one is a massage therapist applicant. Again, failure to appear for an exam. That exam was scheduled in December of last year. for both impairment and inability to practice. And then the last, I'm sorry, did somebody have a question on that one? Okay, sorry. The last one is under B22. It is a bootstrap of North Carolina Medical Board consent order. He relapsed and was deemed to be impaired due to a substance abuse disorder. So it's basically a step one agreement from North Carolina that, except they do not have a suspension. They stayed the suspension down there. Any questions on any of those?
Thank you, Ms. Knapp. I appreciate it.
Certainly, thank you.
Do I hear a motion to approve and issue citation number 2, a summary suspension, for citation number 2? Motion, please.
So moved.
Dr. Schottenstein, Dr. Cockrell, second. Roll call vote, Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Coccoloni,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson, Dr. Johnson? Yes, okay. Dr. Caccarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, yes. We'll be considering citation number 1 separately, so I, Dr. Bechtel, may abstain or vote appropriately. Would any board member like to consider any other citation separately? Do I hear a motion to approve and issue citation number 1? Motion, please.
So moved.
And second, Dr. Coccarella. Roll call, Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Dr. Caccoloni,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson. Yes. Dr. Coccarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and I myself, Dr. Bechtel, will have to abstain. Do I hear a motion to approve and issue citations 3 through 5? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Schottenstein, a second.
I second. Ready, second.
Thank you, sir. We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Safran,
Abstain.
Mr. Caccoloni,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson. Yep. Dr. Coccarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and myself, Dr. Bechtel, yes. We'll now go to the operations report. Ms. Stephanie Luca, Executive Director, will present the operations report. Ms. Luca?
Thank you. Good afternoon, board members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So starting off our operations report, a human resources update for you. We, as we discussed previously, have now moved James Roach, who was our former chief of investigations, into the enforcement attorney world. And he's already digging in with his new role in enforcement. And right now we have Sean McCafferty as our currently acting chief of investigations, and also serving, in his continued capacity as the central supervisor as well. So we hope to make a permanent move soon, and we'll keep you updated on that. We are in the process of interviewing replacements for the constituent inquiries group, as well as one of our enforcement attorneys. And finally, we will be scoping out what we do next. We have a nurse reviewer, Cindy Irwin, who will be leaving us this Friday from staff. And so we'll be scoping out what her replacement role looks like and how we can proceed with that. In the meantime, I think we're going to look into some possible contract work on the nurse review side to keep things moving there while we go through the hiring process. Facilities wise, we talked a little bit about this in finance committee this morning, but for the benefit of the full board, we're actively engaging in a return to work strategy. We do not have a date yet set from the state as to when we can return to work. However, when we do, it will look like employees in 3 buckets. And those buckets will be, some staff members will be primarily office-based. So meaning they will work from the office, unless something odd happens. And some employees will be a hybrid. So they will have a set schedule in which they're in the office some days and working from home others. And then we will have some of our staff members who will likely be at home 100%. And we're still scoping out the details of that, working with the managers before we share out widespread planning with all staff on that. But we'll be working with them, and then we'll be adjusting our floor space accordingly. So that work is actively underway. There will be some IT needs that will, based on, depending on who goes where, we might have some IT needs. That will be part of our normal IT spend. After some discussion this morning, we confirmed that IT spend will be about normal that it is every year. And Susan Lowe confirmed for us that giving up the second floor space in the roads will allow us to save about $45,000 a year. So it's not an insignificant savings from giving that space up. And we have plenty of space on the 3rd floor to accommodate a hybrid and work from home scenario, primarily office based. As far as IT goes, we are, they are busy working on that capital spend plan, as well as working with the investigators on the purchase of some new recording devices. Best investigative practices include recording interviews. And to do that, we want to do it well. And so they'll have recording devices that they can use at the ready, as well as possibly some recording devices they can use with their phones. So, we think that sets them up for success, and it's equipment that they should have if that's the expectation of them. And not at a great cost on those items at all, considering the benefit. If no questions about that, I'll just give a quick budget update. I know Dr. Schottenstein will give more detail in his fiscal report. I would just say that our cash balance continues to be healthy. We're not spending much in the way of office supplies these days. And despite the fact that we do have about 14,000 people who have not renewed their license at this time that should have, but for the extension, we're still doing very well on the cash balance side. And we have every reason to believe that just like the December 1st date that came, that we will start to see people increase their renewals over the next few months. And we're actively engaging in a communication strategy to encourage folks to renew early, and not early and often, but just early, right? We don't want multiples. As far as licensure goes, I really enjoy the statistics that Joe pulls together for the licensure report each month. I think it's telling. They're the face of our agency, and they're frequently the unsung heroes of our agency. And I don't know if you've noticed in your operations report, our processing time just keeps getting faster. So we are just dropping a lot in our processing, and it's something that we'll talk later in our policy meeting about the interstate compact. But it is something that I'm sort of like a dog with a bone on this, that people keep saying, well, it's an expedient way to get licensed in Ohio. And no matter where we land on the compact, I'm not giving into that fact. And in fact, we had a conversation with the compact director yesterday, Chelsea, Jill, and I did, and I said, you just have to stop saying it's faster for out-of-state people to get licensed in Ohio if they go through the compact. We are so fast at getting licensed that, there is no benefit to an out-of-state licensee to do anything but come to us directly for licensure, unless they're doing multiple states at the same time, which, some may be doing. But our licensure staff is doing a great job, and they're really, really keeping pace. We had a real drop-off in calls this January, which we really don't know why. It's actually likely that the January 2020 calls were an anomaly. We had a high number of calls in January 2020. But we have, if you'll remember, we've switched to licensed employees taking calls from home, and our call rate and processing time is the same as it was in the office. So we have not seen a dip in processing or wait times. Folks are getting that same level of service that they were used to. And then finally, moving on to our open complaints and closed complaints data. We have some charts in here for you on a couple dashboards on our open and closed complaints. I think looking at the open complaints dashboard at page 8 of the operations report, one of the things that really jumps out to me is our increase in open complaints, obviously, over the last year. So in our enforcement group, we had about a 12% increase in cases. And in our investigation, we actually had about a 32% increase. We're pretty positive that investigation increase is because our investigators were really sidelined for much of the spring. And those numbers just slowly crept up, and we're digging through that now. You can see we're starting to go back down again with our investigations, but it's something we're just going to have to really sort of play a lot of catch up on. I would also note that our investigators we had quite a few investigators pulled into our historical case review project. And so that was taking them out of the field on some of the current cases. I mean, certainly the high priority cases and those that make us most concerned are getting that touch immediately still, but some of the lower level cases we need to now circle back and not fall too far behind on. And they're actively doing that. The supervisors are meeting with staff to do that. Let's see, and if you turn to closed complaint, part of our increase in caseload might also be because we have fewer protocol closes that we're doing. So those cases that we used to routinely close upon triage, we're actually, we have a higher number that are going into our different departments, whether that's investigations or enforcement or standards. So that sort of naturally correlates with our increased volume in other areas as well. We've been meeting as a staff to talk about how do we shrink our net of what comes in the door, but make sure that we're still receiving the complaints that we need, right? And so Dr. Schottenstein brought this up in an earlier committee meeting. We get so many complaints that we don't have jurisdiction of. And even though we don't spend a lot of time on those complaints, we still spend some time on those complaints, right? And so we're really thinking about how do we get a good quality complaint and ensure that we're capturing what we need, and that might also cut down on some of the time that we're doing in the investigations. And so some of that's going to look like changes on the intake process. So we're just kind of beginning those conversations now. Turning to the line graphs, I think you can see on here that notable trends in the open complaints. We are really seeing an increase in multiple allegations and minimal standards cases. Not an insignificant increase in those types of cases. And I would also note that we're seeing an increase in impairment and sexual misconduct cases. Not nearly to the extent that we are in the others, but those are two issues that we're, very sensitive to from a safety issue. And so trying to be mindful of prioritization when those things come in the door, how we move those along in the right way. And again, the closed complaints graph really shows those protocol closes dropping over time. and that really does increase then what's coming to our staff. So that is my operations report. Well, I can't forget communications is at the back after our close and open data, and communications has been very busy. Jerica and Julie are doing a fantastic job keeping us moving, responding to multiple media requests, kind of keeping our social media live, and also doing some presentations. So, if there aren't any further questions, that is my operations report.
Thank you, Ms. Luca. Ms. Anderson, will you now discuss the rules and policies?
May I just say something before you go forward, Dr.
Yes.
Beck?
Yes.
I just want to congratulate the staff and Stephanie. The timing on the licenses is just enormously impressive, and wait time of 1 minute in a government agency, remarkable. I just think the documents, the data people are doing such a wonderful job of, even though I find some of the charts still is harder to read than probably most of you. I just think you folks are just, it's really remarkable. I think the staff needs to be congratulated. Stephanie, you're pushing on the right points to get this organization moving in a much more efficient way. So thank you so much. I'm personally enormously impressed.
Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. I think your opinion is shared by the board. We're very grateful for the effort and hard work of our staff and members. Thank you.
This is all staff. This is all them responding to a lot. And I had one nice staff member point out to me this week that when your boss is a workaholic, it runs downhill. So I'm trying to be a little more mindful of that, and trying not to overload them too much. But I do think we do have some good momentum and we have a good energy right now.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Anderson?
All right. So we're going to talk about some rules. First, you have your rule review update, which is just kind of an overview of all the rules and where they are. And of note, we had the rules that we were planning to look at for 2021, and those are out for initial comment. The end of the comment period is Friday. So we'll be bringing those to you next month with the comments that we've received. But we also have a huge number of rules that we're going to have to make changes to or rescind based on House Bill 442 that passed in the lame duck session. So I've also provided in your rule review schedule what those rules are. And some of them are things that are in process right now. For the ones that are ready to go to JCAR, I am making those changes. You did approve last month changes to the CME rules that had 442 changes about the volunteer hours and clinical research faculty certificate changes. I will be filing those with JCAR on March 1st. And then I'll also be filing the other rules ready to go to JCAR on Friday. That will allow us to have one public hearing for all those rules together. So we were able to work out the timing on that. So you'll see progress on those next month. So unless there's any questions, that's kind of where we are on those rules.
Thank you.
Okay. I can keep going because I've got the next couple of things, if you're all right for me to do that, Dr. Buckle. Okay. So next, we have one of our rules, 4731-1103. So this rule is pending with the weight loss rules at CSI. Dr. Schottenstein took a look at that rule and thought that there was some language that we needed to update. The rule has been substantially unchanged for many years. And so you'll see in the attached rule, in paragraph B, there are some updates using, the updated terminology for the Schedule II controlled substance stimulants. Dr. Schottenstein, I didn't know if you had any comments that you wanted to make for the board to consider.
If you'd be so kind, I'll just sort of go through it, if it's okay. So if we sort of scroll through, what we'll see is that in 1B, I think it makes sense to state perform an appropriate physical and mental status examination of the patient. And then in 2B, I would change that to read, quote, the treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, and or related disorders, close quote. Really, there's no such thing as abnormal behavioral syndrome, and hyperkinetic syndrome is old language for ADHD. And so then in 2C, I would change it to read, and you can already see it, the treatment of major or mild neurocognitive disorder due to traumatic brain injury or substance medication-induced major or mild neurocognitive disorder. So these are basically the same indications that are already present there in the rule, but it's just updated language from the DSM-5. Looking at 2D, really one would not prescribe a stimulant as part of a process of assessing the differential diagnosis of depression. I just sort of recommended crossing that out. And then looking at 2A, the treatment of narcolepsy, idiopathic hypersomnia, and hypersomnias due to medical conditions known to cause excessive sleepiness, I think that's fine. And I also think that 2D, formerly 2E, the treatment of depression, shown to be refractory to other therapeutic modalities, including pharmacologic approaches such as antidepressants, I think that's also fine. Looking at 2E, formerly 2F, it seems like Roman numerals 1 and 6 are redundant, and I don't know that we need both of those. So I thought we could just remove those in favor of updated language, which would state chronic pain as defined in Rule 4731-1101 of the Administrative Code. And then my thought also was with Roman numeral 2, the closed head injuries indication, it's redundant with the previously mentioned indication in 2C for the treatment of traumatic brain injury. Roman numerals 3 and 4, cancer-related fatigue and fatigue experienced during the terminal stages of disease are already referenced by the previous indication under 2A for the treatment of excessive sleepiness. And I think that Roman numeral 5, depression experienced during the terminal stages of disease, is already referenced in previously mentioned 2D, formerly 2E, the treatment of refractory depression. I just felt like, the way that those different scenarios are laid out in those Roman numerals were substantially already addressed earlier in the body of the rule. So, certainly glad to know if that feels comfortable for you all, but that was just sort of where I landed with that.
And what I would be looking for is if you're comfortable with the revised language, if we could have a motion and a second for that, and then I will file that as an amendment with the Common Sense Initiative. They may require us to do another public circulation, which we can do. And I may wait and do that with the weight loss rules because those will happen at the same time. They're in the same package. So I am doing the research on the weight loss rules and plan to bring that to you at the March meeting. So, but if I could have a motion and a second with this, we'll move forward in that direction.
So moved. One comment, Michael.
Sure.
I like the changes. My only concern is if someone references this and they see the deletions, are they going to make the assumption? I know you're there, but about chronic severe pain, my only concern is, should there be something in the newsletter that says those things have been incorporated? It's the same stuff. It's just it's something to alert people that may be a little bit more anal on this about the changes, so that they understand it's the same thing. You just cleaned it up.
Yeah, point taken. Is that something we can do, Kim?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're required to, in the rulemaking process for the business impact analysis, we'll have to explain what we're doing with the language. And so we can do it there. And then at the time that we file with JCAR, we have to do it there. We have to say why we're amending. So you know, we can definitely do that in the rule materials. Also, you know, on the website, we can provide information about that too.
I think on the website would be good because the JCAR process and the other stuff, I doubt if most practitioners are looking at that. People look at the website if they see something's changed. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, do I hear a motion to approve the updated language to be filed with Common Sense Initiative? Another motion, please. Dr. Schottenstein, second. And all we need now is really just to do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. The motion passes. Ms. Anderson, do you want to go on?
Sure, absolutely. So the next thing I have is we have a request from Eric Plinke, who's an attorney that, you know, appears in front of you fairly frequently and represents physicians. And he has asked the board to review whether specific surgical tasks can be delegated to a registered nurse under the direct supervision of a physician in the board's delegation rules in chapter 4731.23. You'll see in the memo, there's very detailed information about the tasks that they're looking at. And it all deals with orthopedic surgery and a nurse who would be really, I believe, acting as a third, third and fourth hands, extra set of hands for a surgeon who is working. Just by way of background, the Board of Nursing, so this first went to the Board of Nursing and they reviewed it and said, it's not in the scope of practice for a nurse to do these surgical tasks. But under their decision tree, which I've attached for you on how they make determinations, there are some things that a nurse can do under the direct supervision of a physician that can be delegated under the medical board's delegation rules. And then I also set out that for you. In the process of putting this together, we also provided, we requested more information from Eric Plinke, which is also provided for you about, specifically, what kind of tasks these are, what they're looking for from us, and, what kind of specificity they're looking for. I've also talked with Dr. Feibel about this, with his expertise as being an orthopedic surgeon. And so I guess what I'm looking for is, kind of your thoughts about this request. I think it's probably too detailed. I think what we need to do is provide a written response. And so I'd like to get your thoughts, and then maybe if I could work with Dr. Feibel on this to develop a written response and bring that back to you. So that's really what I'm looking for. And I know this is the first time that you've seen this, and there is a lot of detail.
Dr. Feibel, do you have any comments to make on?
Sure, I'd be happy to. This is something that a surgical tech does a lot in the OR, where if you only are yourself in a surgical tech and you need a third pair of hands, this is something a surgical tech would do. So I think it's fine to allow a nurse to do these types of tasks. I think we need to be very specific that they have to be under the direct supervision of a surgeon with the surgeon scrubbed in, and only when the surgeon needs a third pair of hands. So there is not any ambiguity in this, and it can be construed as, oh, the surgeon's sitting over in the corner and the nurse or the scrub tech are doing the procedure. So I think as long as we're very specific about this, I think it'll be fine. I think we need to be very specific. I, by and large, am not a big fan of answering these types of letters in general, because I think it gets us into a sticky wicket. And I think we found that in the past, that we need to be really careful with these types of letters. But I think this is a fine use of this type of letter, because the physician ultimately is responsible, and we just need to reiterate that.
Thank you, Dr. Farber, for those comments. Dr. Rothermill?
Just a quick question, and I don't disagree with this at all, but is there an opinion that this would in any way open a slippery slope for other surgical specialties to suddenly start requesting special circumstances like this?
I think that's a good question. And there's no way to actually know the answer to that. But I do think this is pretty specific. I would also say it didn't start with us. It started with asking that question from the nursing board. And then the nursing board said, hey, you might want to ask the medical board in their decision tree. So, it's possible that we could get more, but it also came to us in kind of a very specific way.
Thank you. Dr. Schonstein?
Along those lines, real quick, I think if another specialty, I think this could be ubiquitous to another specialty where you need a third pair of hands. So I don't think this is just special to orthopedics. I think this is just outlining, yes, you can help when directed by a physician and they need a third pair of hands, but no, you can't open, no, you can't put in a screw while the surgeons, or you can't do any of these tasks that are specifically designed for a surgeon or a PA or an advanced nurse practitioner, that they are able to do those types of things. So I think we just need to be very specific in this and answer the questions directly, as opposed to, and very narrowly, as opposed to opening up the room for any slippery slope.
Thank you. Dr. Schonstein?
Hi, thank you. I do have misgivings about providing legal advice, as a board about scope of practice. And, if that's our consensus, that this is reasonable and narrowly tailored, sure. I also, though, wondered if either we have or it would be reasonable to create an FAQ regarding questions about delegation, because it's a much more neutral sort of way of couching, our opinions. Where an attorney contacts us about matters like this, we can simply refer them to our FAQ. And depending on the nature of the question, maybe if it's not addressed in the FAQ, then we potentially modify the FAQ. It just takes us out of the loop of providing legal advice, to a firm, because it's also, narrowly delivered as well. In other words, that firm has that, advice from us, but it's not necessarily disseminated. So just sort of wanted to throw that out there.
My thought would be, if we do this, we put it on our website. I mean, we're giving it in response to a question, but we put it out there for everybody to see.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Reddy?
Yeah, I shared the same thoughts as Dr. Schottenstein. It's an attorney who is requesting, who is asking the question. And what is the intent behind that? It makes me think. So if the board gives a legal opinion on this, that attorney or somebody else can use it in future. And I'm really concerned about that. Me being a orthopedic surgeon in a different country, yes, I felt if I had 6 hands at one time. But we are opening ourselves to many other specialities asking for help from the assistants.
Mr. Gacoloni?
Just one comment. I mean, we're a regulatory body, regulatory agencies. There are others out there, FDA, DEA, they give opinions. OSHA gives specific opinions. But we can't just basically turn a blind eye when somebody asks us a question. I mean, that's our role, is to advise. You know, we're going to play gotcha, because that's what it's going to be if you don't say something. It's a gotcha game, and that's not right. So yes, I think to Kim's point, it needs to be disseminated for everybody, so everybody is on the same page. But I don't think that should shirk us from our responsibility as a regulatory body to advise our regulated industry. If that's the case, then we shouldn't have rules or anything else. We'll just have a big seek and hunt game for our regulatory, people that we regulate. And that's not right. So yeah, I agree. We should be answering questions, whether it comes from an attorney or otherwise. It could just as easily come from a physician or a nurse or someone else. I mean, what difference does it make? It's probably more articulate because it came from an attorney, but there's always that concern about gotcha. But again, this is part of being a regulatory agency.
Dr. Schonstein?
Hi, I really appreciate your comments. That all makes sense to me, but I'm curious. This, how shall I say, the nature of the answer that we provide will result in an expansion of scope. What if the answer we gave was different? What if the answer we gave was, that we thought that these things were not okay, to engage in? Then we're giving, legal advice about restricting scope. And I'm just curious if you would feel the same way.
Well, let me ask you a question. Then if somebody did that and we brought a notice against them, we took action against them, why is that any different? That's actually worse in some respects, right? Because we are all of a sudden setting up precedent. We are taking legal action. We are making a determination. But so, I mean, which way do you want it? Do you want it as a notice and an action against a regulated individual? Or you want it as an opinion which they can follow? And you know what? If they disagree, it's always their right to challenge us, right? I mean, it's not unheard of nowadays, especially with the common sense initiative. But nonetheless, I think this is our responsibility to, if we can make it broader, like an FAQ, I totally agree with that, because that's what it should be. But sometimes you get big questions, and sometimes, but again, as long as everybody gets the answer, and we have to be careful, right? We got to be careful about scope creep. I agree with you, and that's the challenge, right? We need to be vigilant.
Dr. Feibel?
Yeah, after thinking through this and hearing Dr. Schonstein's comments, and I know he and I had a long discussion when the last scope of practice issue came, where they asked for a letter of clarification of scope of practice. I do think this is a slippery slope in that regard, and I would be careful about answering questions like this, because I think that's how scope creep does occur. So maybe in retrospect, this is not the best question to answer. Maybe we should write back and say, here's our rule. You can interpret it the way, it's for you to interpret the way you want to interpret it. Or we should change the rule and send it to JCAR and everyone else. I did make a pact with myself after the last scope practice issue that I wasn't gonna vote for timing on this. I didn't think of it that way, but now that I'm seeing it in a different light, I am seeing it that way. And I think we as a board get ourselves into trouble, and I think we potentially could have gotten ourselves into trouble with the last one of these that occurred. And we haven't heard anything back about it yet, but I think we always could. And I just think that's the wrong thing for this board to do. In these situations, we should, the beauty of being at home, in these days, we should really refrain from doing that as much as possible. And if we're going to change something, it should.
Dr. Schonstein?
All right, thank you. I appreciate all that. And I guess what I would say too, in terms of the point that was raised earlier about whether an individual has, a scope question that comes before us, or a specialty does, like a profession, like nursing, I would say that it's, how shall I say, it's just a more substantial action to weigh in on the scope of a profession, I think, than it is with an individual where we sort of point to our own rule and statute. I think if we are, essentially giving advice, right, regarding the scope of another specialty, all I'm saying is I just am, mindful about the gravity of doing that.
I would like to just point out that this is interpretation of our own rule, our delegation rule. So it is a little different than other things that you've seen.
Kim, could you, I'm sorry, I'm having a little hard difficulty listening to hear you. Could you say that again?
They're asking for interpretation of our delegation rule. So it is an interpretation of our own rule as to whether essentially a nurse acting as an unlicensed person could be delegated these specific tasks under our rule. And they were sent here by the nursing board, who said it's not in the scope of nursing practice, but it may be something that a physician could delegate as a medical task, which is a normal part of their analysis. As you'll see in, one of the items that I sent you from the nursing board is their decision tree when they get questions like that. And part of it is, does it fit within the medical board's delegation of a medical task? So I think it's a little different than saying, can nurses do this? Because the answer is nurses can't do this under their license. The nursing board has said that, so they can't do it. Then the question becomes, can they do it kind of as an unlicensed person being delegated by the physician? And that does put it squarely with us, I think.
But is the answer? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Emil.
Dr. Swain?
But is that question a clear one, Kim? Because my concern is if people provide clear answers, it just seems so weird to me. I agree with Mr. Giacaloni's point on that. I mean, if we have a clear-cut answer, I think we should give them one. And then it becomes weird because if something happens, they come in from the board and say, you know what, we asked you, you didn't give us an answer, you didn't tell us no, so we kept doing it. That seems weird to me too.
Mm-hmm. Right. If there is information, go ahead.
I think it underscores something that Dr. Schottenstein said, is that we have to have a very robust FAQ. I think it makes a lot of sense to make sure that our FAQs are clear about what our own rules are. And I think we have to be extraordinarily careful about giving legal advice. We shouldn't be doing that. We can interpret our rules, but beyond that, I think it's very dangerous.
Dr. Coccarello, I think you had a comment to make. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, Bruce. I'm just trying, because there's a lack of surgical techs at various institutions, or is this kind of mission creep by, surgical nurses or some type of nurses? Because as much as we can write specific language, there's several dozen surgical subspecialties. I mean, there's several on this board itself, let alone dozens that none of us have expertise in. And no offense to anyone on the board, but I mean, if you're talking about urologic procedures and various things, I just worry, is someone out there going to start delegating things and it's not specifically prohibited because it's not specifically mentioned? So it just seems like, I don't know how big of and I'm not a surgeon, so I don't know how big of a problem this is in a practical sense for surgeons not to be able to get cases done in a timely fashion because they don't have enough help in the OR. But that's just my thoughts.
Dr. Safran and then Dr. Feibel. Dr. Safran?
2 points. I think we discussed something similar to this when we were dealing with the chiropractors and ultrasound and the massage therapists.
Mm-hmm.
Their scope doesn't include that, but if they become just a regular person, then the chiropractors could use them in their office as a ultrasound tech or muscle stim or any of those things. So I think we've already kind of crossed that bridge. And number two is that a hospital or surgery center is going to have to authorize said person to assist the physician. There, you're not just going to come in off the street and you're there and hello, and I'm going to hold the clamps for you. So they really have to be brought in most times. Many of the surgeons, whether it's a neurosurgeon or an orthopedic surgeon, has someone in their practice that assists them, whether it's just a scrub tech or it's a nurse or something to that effect, but they're still given privileges through a surgery center or a hospital. So I think that they're going to take care of the ability of these people to assist. And again, I think if we treat them as a regular person, then they're a regular person and they can assist said doctor, provided they get the privileges to do that.
Dr. Feibel?
Yeah, just to clear something up. So from Dr. Cacarella, so many hospitals use nurses to scrub, as inefficient as it seems. That happens sometimes. So I think that's probably where this is coming from, as opposed to having a lack of scrub techs. It's just sometimes nurses scrub and sometimes not. If the hospital's efficient, they can pay less by getting a scrub tech rather than a nurse. But some hospitals have an overflow of nurses that scrub. So I think that's where this is coming from. I think this is with a surgeon directly supervising a scrub tech, a nurse, somebody like that. I think this is fine. I really like the idea of doing a frequently asked question sheet rather than responding directly to this memo, because I don't think we should get in the business of answering lawyers, or for that matter, licensees' questions, specific questions, because I think that's where we get scope creep. And so if we do a frequently asked question sheet and we address some of these issues in that, that's what we put out to everyone, and we handle it that way. That'd be my vote.
Mr. Caccoloni?
Yeah, I agree with that, just as long as we answer the questions, because what I don't want to see is this generic FAQ out there, which, people's concerns are, extrapolate. That will give you extrapolation with steroids, okay? If you want it, if you're okay with the position, then just say it. No offense, but just say it. Because you're going to play this game about see the rules, see that. Creative people, listen, lawyers are notorious for that. I can find you a whole bunch of loopholes in these things that let you do whatever the hell you want. But that's not what you want, right? If you want to dictate it, then dictate it. I mean, I know, and I go back to FDA because it's a science organization. Like, this is a science organization. They tell you specifically what they want, because they want no mistakes. They want no excursions from what they feel for safety. DEA is the opposite. They don't tell you what the hell you want. You're stepping all over the place. Okay? That has not worked well for the regulated industry or for the public. The FDA model works. So I would strongly advocate, yes, answer the question. Don't give it specifically to one body so they have an advantage, but put it in an FAQ, but answer the question. Don't shy away from that. Again, that is our responsibility. Somebody asks you a question, you shouldn't be hiding the ball on them. They're coming to you because you're the experts. You're the decision maker. Make the damn decision.
Well, I thought we'd go ahead and wrap up the discussion. Ms. Anderson, do you want us to go ahead with the motion to work together as a board then to formulate a response? And it could be a Q&A type response, or?
Yes, if you could.
Okay. Do I hear a motion to direct staff to formulate a response based on Rule 4731-23-02 OAC?
So moved.
Second, Dr. Caccarello.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Ms. Wonsky will now provide a legislative update.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on legislative matters currently impacting the State Medical Board. As of today, our three priorities are the budget, the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact, and how the elimination of the cosmetic therapy license in House Bill 442 during the last General Assembly impacts those licensees. Last week, the governor announced the executive budget for the next biennium, and that will become effective July 1st, 2021. The budget will now go through the legislative process of hearings in both the House and the Senate, and then through the process of conference committee before the final version is sent back to the governor for signature. There's a possibility for changes to be made to the language at each step of the lengthy process. The various versions are all harmonized in the conference committee, which is made up of members of both the House and the Senate. In the governor's proposed budget, the medical board was awarded a 14% increase. We had submitted an aggressive package to add staff, particularly in response to the Strauss Working Group report. We are pleased that our initial budget request was granted in the executive version, and will continue to advocate for that number as we continue to carefully monitor the language throughout the remainder of the process. The budget proposal was discussed also in the Finance Committee, and Stephanie spoke about it in the operations report just a little while ago. There will be additional details in the Finance Committee report out. It is important to note that the State Medical Board budget is paid for by licensing fees and not general tax or general revenue tax dollars. I have plans to meet with legislators on finance committees and subcommittees in both chambers to address any questions that they might have about the board or our budget request. And Director Luca will provide testimony before committees, though we don't have scheduled dates at this time. I will be sure to keep the board updated as the bill moves its way through the many steps of the process. Senate Bill 6 would require Ohio to join the Interstate Medical Licensure Compact. This is the same language that we saw with Senate Bill 364 during the last General Assembly. We have held several conversations back in the fall and currently with the board, or with the bill sponsor, co-sponsors, with the IMLC and stakeholders regarding the board's position. And we continue to have regular conversations with those entities. A few weeks ago, Director Luca and I met with the bill sponsor and the co-sponsor to continue to reiterate that the language will provide operational challenges and could actually slow the process to licensure for out-of-state applicants coming to Ohio through the compact. We also met with Marshall Smith, who is the executive director of the IMLC, yesterday, and asked questions regarding implementation. Mr. Smith has agreed to make a presentation before the board at the next monthly meeting on March 10th. It is important to note that the bill language regarding the compact is a contract and cannot be changed, but amendments may be added to the bill to allow for some flexibilities around implementation of the legislation. House Bill 442, which was initially introduced last General Assembly and applied to certified public accountants, was amended late in the legislative process and removed cosmetic therapists from under the regulatory authority of the medical board. This language will become effective on April 8th and would leave cosmetic therapists who mainly practice laser hair removal unlicensed and unregulated outside of salons. This is problematic since the majority of cosmetic therapists do not work in salons, but in medical offices and independent facilities. After a great deal of research, conversations with the amendment sponsor and the Cosmetic Therapy Association of Ohio, we have determined that the best course of action would be to amend our Rule 4731-1803, which is the light-based medical device practices rule, as long as the board finds this a suitable solution. The proposed amendment to the rule would allow physicians, or would continue to allow physicians, the authority to delegate to unlicensed cosmetic therapists. And I would like to ask Kim Anderson now to provide an outline of the rule and the proposed change.
Thank you. The idea is that we would leave everything just the way it is, but then remove the cosmetic therapist licensed by the board. We would just say cosmetic therapist. With the idea that then they would still have to have the same underlying initial training, getting that initial training. And then they would still have to have, the oversight of the physician, doing the number of procedures and things. And that would be the only change that we would make. It would still allow, once they have reached a certain threshold like they do now, that they don't have to have on-site direct supervision. It would still allow them to do what they do now. So that's our recommendation.
Ms. Montgomery?
Tim is, thank you very much, Doctor. Tim, how do we ensure, are you then saying it's up to the doctor to ensure that the training is appropriate?
In the rule, we did have, in the amended rule, we have an outline of the training that they need to have. And I believe there's also that exists in the existing rule as well. So give me 1 second just to pull it up. So it does, put a requirement on a physician to meet several steps before delegating, and that would still be in place.
So while we wouldn't be double checking through a licensure application, it would devolve directly on the physician. I mean, there would be a heavier burden, if you will, because there's no backup. It's just the doc looking at it. Because we wouldn't be looking at it because we're not licensed them anymore.
Right. So the rule does have, so regardless of what they would have to meet initial licensure, before a cosmetic therapist can do laser hair removal, they do have to complete a number of hours of training. And that, I believe, has always been up to the physician who's delegating that. So that particular piece would stay the same, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Kim, I have one question. Since they're unlicensed, how does that work in terms of I'm a cosmetic therapist? So all of a sudden I decide today I'm a cosmetic therapist. I mean, what's the requirement there? I mean, accreditation, but then who enforces that they get the accreditation? I'm just trying to understand what's the difference between me saying I'm a cosmetic therapist and going and doing it under delegation situation or someone who actually has experience and training.
Yeah, I think that is certainly one of the issues of concern here.
If I could,
Oh, well, go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, and I think Nate's going to jump in here.
Nathan?
I think the thought would be that the rule will have these education and training requirements. If you had a cosmetic therapist that just refused to comply with what I would consider in our work with Dr. Bechtel, quite robust requirements, then you would be in a situation where you had an unlicensed person who wasn't following the qualifications in order to be delegated that medical task to. And so then you would have a situation where that person would be running afoul of doing the unlicensed practice of medicine because they weren't.
So would the doctor, right?
Possibly, like aiding and abetting, yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, that person's authority comes from his delegation or her delegation, right? So without the delegation, there is no capability there. So they would have to be culpable, wouldn't they? Because, I mean, you have no license to take from cosmetic therapists.
Dr. Schonstein?
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the conversation we had a moment ago about orthopedic surgeons delegating to nursing, which is to say, for purposes of the topic at hand, the nurse would be considered an unlicensed person, and the physician would simply delegate. So it's sort of reminiscent of that. You know, the cosmetic therapist isn't licensed, so to speak, anymore, but is just a person to whom a physician is, is delegating.
Somewhat. I think you're looking at a slightly different rule, because I think what we've said is laser hair removal is, it is definitely a medical procedure, not a medical task. So you can't go under the rule that we were talking about before, and then there's a whole new set of rules. So it's slightly different, but similar, yes.
And if I may, our rules still apply, even though we don't have purview over these licensees anymore.
Well, in the rule, we are having them apply to registered nurses and LPNs currently for laser hair removal. So I think it would be somewhat similar to that. We don't license RNs and LPNs, but we do have a rule that talks about what they can do. So similar.
Right, thank you.
So how do you discipline
really quickly that
cosmetic therapists, or is it just a criminal offense if they're not licensed?
I think that,
Don't you run into an issue of just a civil liability in the delegation by the doc? If the doc or a licensure, some kind of discipline of the doc for inappropriately delegating to somebody who doesn't have the proper training.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Stephanie, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yes, Ms.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that Chelsea did some research, and that in all of the states where it's unlicensed, this is how this is handled. Or I think so far our research has shown some states license this still, some states don't. We haven't found any states where it's the Wild West of go do laser hair removal without any sort of delegation or licensure, right? And so I think our interest is making sure we're not in that position, and that the delegation would be similar to what other states do where it's unlicensed.
I know practically we're talking about hair removal. We're not talking about surgery. I don't know if the sense of concern is, at least to me, is that important, is that high. So I'm probably okay with this.
Ms. Wonsky, do you want to go on with further discussion then?
Sure. Do we need to get, board approval to make the change to that rule?
We can, if you'd rather, if you want to give approval for the general idea to do that, the rule's pending at CSI. We've talked about other amendments to it. So we can do that now, and make those amendments, or if you want to see it, we can make sure that you see it before it goes. So either way.
Which do you prefer, Kim?
I think it's quicker if you let me do it, and then I can file. There's still, we're changing so much. I think we're going to have to give another public comment period, because we're already changing a lot in the rule. If you're comfortable with me just kind of taking out the license references to cosmetic therapists, but leaving everything else the same, then I'll just go ahead and do that, and we'll see what kind of feedback we get. Does that work?
So you'd like us to go ahead and make a motion then?
Yes, if you could.
Do I have a motion?
Move.
Dr. Chastain, second?
Second.
If the motion is second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Ms. Wonsky?
Great. Thank you so much. So that actually concludes my legislative update. I wasn't sure if anyone had questions on the compact or the budget, other two items that I brought up.
I do, if I may.
Sure.
I just was curious if we're going to have rulemaking authority with the compact.
So the compact language is considered a contract. So we can make very few changes around, or we can make no changes to the actual compact language. So, I mean, it does not grant us rulemaking authority. What we can impact is, how quickly we are required to implement the legislation. So I think really our hands are tied as far as, actual compact itself.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wonsky.
Chelsea, I have a question.
Sure.
I noticed the legislative tracker had 3 bills, and I presume it's because the General Assembly is turned over. But what happened to all the work we were doing before? In particular interest for me was Senate Bill 1, telemedicine. Do those things vapor when a new General Assembly come out, or what happens?
Yeah, so those generalists or the legislature cycles on 2-year cycles. So every 2 years, there's a new General Assembly, a brand new legislature comes in, and everything starts over again. So we had that cycle this January, and so all of the bills that didn't get passed by December of last year are gone. They just, they died during the process, and so all of the bills that are on there now are brand new. I should note too, since you brought that up, that there are a few bills on the link to the tracker that are not on the document that was uploaded, because they were introduced after the documents were uploaded to Onboard. So the link that I sent out is up to date, but the document you have is not.
Thank you.
So do you have any transparency on where we're going to end up with telemedicine? Is there going to be a bill that comes out in this General Assembly that you know of?
To date, I have not heard whether or not there will be a bill. I know that it's, something that a lot of members are talking about, and they still have an interest in particular with, the pandemic. I think that it's definitely a topic, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see something fairly soon, but there is nothing currently introduced.
And then finally, the interstate compact discussion we had, it seemed to be there was a lot of political momentum in support of that. Is that your impression as well?
Yes, there are several stakeholders that have influence, I guess, in the political sphere that have support or express support for this. So, some big hospital systems in Ohio are on board. The OSMA and other entities definitely are in support of this.
Chelsea and I learned yesterday, Dr. Soin, that Texas is the only state medical association that has actually taken a stand against it. All of the other associations, including the AMA, have been pushing this. So I think that is probably driving a huge piece of that response. And as she said, every major system has come out now for it. So pretty big national movement right now.
Quick question. Since this is where we're trending, are we dealing with the FSMB to figure out about, there's probably a contact committee. Are we a part of that? If we're not, we better get on that. You know what I mean? Because we better have a seat at that table.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's been so now that we sort of see where this train is headed, we're getting really active in the world of this compact. So a couple of different strategies that we'll take with that. First, I think it's important that we start connecting with some of the other larger states who are already members of the compact in really figuring out kind of implementation, how can we be efficient, and about our implementation lessons learned, that sort of thing. Also, how do we leverage as a large state that similarity with the other large state members of the compact, and then to working with FSMB on that piece of, on the policy piece of things. We have had, I think, really productive conversations with Senator Robner and Senator Huffman, expressing our continued concerns with the compact, but also acknowledging that if this is happening, we want to do it right, and we want to be good partners. We want to have a good relationship, because it doesn't benefit our licensees not to, right? And so we want to go into this the right way. They've been supportive of that. From an implementation timeline, from a staffing perspective, they've been receptive to some of our comments, as well as our need. We bring a lot to the table as a state that has so many doctors who we will likely export to other states. We will be probably the largest exporter in the compact. And so we bring a lot to the table. We bring a lot of revenue. We bring a lot of policy. And so we express our desire that they support us in being able to have an active kind of leadership voice in that piece of the compact. And everybody has been receptive to that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Luca. Mr. Riordan, Mr. Smith?
Dr. Bechtel, sort of the tail end of the legislative update. This is not an active piece of legislation that's in this current General Assembly, but I wanted to just give just a brief COVID-19 vaccination update that relates to some legislation that passed in the last General Assembly, and also some recent federal action in regards to an amendment to the PrEP Act. And so, if I may, both of these recent actions, Senate Bill 310, which was passed on December 29th, and was an emergency provision that became effective right away, as well as the amendment to the PrEP Act, are responses to the COVID pandemic that would make it easier for health professionals and increase the pool for healthcare professionals to provide COVID vaccinations. Specifically on the Senate Bill 310 part of things, it would allow a physician, physician assistant, or a respiratory care professional whose license had expired within the last 5 years to practice in Ohio on a temporary license for a very short period of time until May 1st of this year, May 1st, 2021. So the practitioner must have previously held a license, an active license, within the last 5 years, and had let that license expire or lapse in order to qualify for this provision. And practitioners who the medical board had revoked or suspended, or who had surrendered their license in order to avoid disciplinary action or any other adverse action, would be disqualified from using this provision to practice temporarily in Ohio. So this Ohio provision is a very short-term provision until May the 1st, and was passed with this emergency designation specifically in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Just last week, this is the U.S. Department of Health had issued what was its fifth amendment to the declaration under what's called the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, the PrEP Act, for medical countermeasures against COVID-19. So they have done other amendments in relation to like pharmacy technicians, et cetera. This one, I would say, is the one that really hits squarely into a lot of medical board jurisdiction of licensees. So it adds more COVID-19 vaccinators in all states, and Ohio included, in two different ways. First, it would allow any healthcare professional who holds a state license that permits that person to prescribe, dispense, or administer the COVID-19 vaccination to prescribe, dispense, or administer COVID vaccinations in any states. So basically, it allows people to go across state lines to vaccinate. It removes the state barriers, and it's directly in response to, you're reading all in the news all the time. Supply of vaccine has got to be ramping up, and it's adding to the pool of potential vaccinators. The second part is more specifically tailored. It would be any physician, APRN, LN, or LPN, who has held an active license in that profession that allowed them to prescribe, dispense, or administer vaccines, but that person let that license lapse or expire within the last 5 years. If their previous license that they let expire gave them that scope of practice to be able to do it, it allows them to administer the COVID vaccination in any other state. To qualify under this, even though they had let their license expire, the professional must not have been suspended or restricted by any licensing authority. They must not have let their or have surrendered their license while under suspension, discipline, or investigation, or surrendered their license following an arrest, and they can't be on the OIG's basically list of excluded individuals. The interesting part, the second and more interesting part of the qualifications is, other than not being a bad actor, there are vaccination training requirements which would include for these healthcare professionals going across state lines that they need to document completion of the CDC's COVID-19 training modules. And for active licensees that aren't currently practicing, or the expired licensees that I mentioned, they must provide documentation that a currently practicing healthcare provider experienced in vaccination has observed them and confirmed their competency in both preparing and administering the particular COVID-19 vaccine that they're going to be administering. So I realize it's a lot of information, but the takeaway from all this is these two, both a state action and a federal action, are increasing the pool of vaccinators, and we will continue to monitor similar things that are occurring or any other vaccination updates and continue to update them in future meetings. So I just wanted to share that important information with you all.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Riordan, we'll go ahead now with the Dietetics Advisory Report.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. It'll be relatively quick. We had to reschedule the meeting this week, and it's been rescheduled for March 8th at 2 p.m.
Thank you. Dr. Swain, would you like to give the ICD-10 data committee review?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. The ICD-10 committee is going to be meeting after this board call. We're going to be going over a couple of things. Obviously approving the minutes and that kind of stuff. You're going to talk to the Board of Pharmacy, their Director of Internal Communications, as we discussed in the last meeting, about getting a high-level summary of reporting that may be available to our licensees. Could be beneficial. As I mentioned in the last call, pain physicians get a very robust report sent to us every quarter. In fact, I got mine on Monday of this week. I actually shared that report with Stephanie and Dr. Schottenstein just so they could see what the report looked like. But I understand that not every physician gets that. And then after that, we are going to, among board staff, go over the internal data that we have collected as a board. For some review. And then finally, the last item that we plan to discuss is, research opportunities and education outreach opportunities based on the data. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. Next, Dr. Schottenstein, will you give the financial committee report?
Sure, of course. So looking at our fiscal update for December 2020, revenue was $613,513. That's a significant dip in revenue from November, when we received approximately $2 million in revenue. You may recall that was a function of our licensees meeting the December 1st deadline for renewal, which had been extended for all of our licensees. Subsequently, there was another delay in the renewal deadline until July 1st. So the decrease in revenue is likely a function, once again, of our licensees delaying the renewal of their licenses. We are halfway through the fiscal year. That's always a good time to take stock. You may note that our cash balance is still quite high by historical standards at $6,599,624. That should act as a cushion over the next several months with regard to the anticipated decrease in revenue because of the renewal deadline extension. And again, we should recoup that revenue from the deadline extension later in the fiscal year, just as we saw in November 2020 with the previous deadline extension. With regard to our spending, we only just received the invoice from DAS for the past 4 months of rent, totaling $124,000, as well as various other services they provide. That will reflect in the January 2021 numbers as a spike in expenditures. And combined with an anticipated drop in revenue because of the licensure renewal deadline delay, it will negatively impact our cash balance. We also just received a $333,000 invoice for e-license services from DAS, which will show up in either the January or February numbers. Credit card processing fees continue to trickle in, and that's another major expense. But again, this is more of a function of cash flow. Everything should even out by the end of the fiscal year. No fines were assessed or collected in December. We have a budget update. Our request for our expansion budget was approved by OBM, and the governor's office sent it to the House and Senate, which must still approve it. We had requested $12.3 million for fiscal year 22 and $12.5 million for fiscal year 23. OBM passed the language through largely unchanged, including approving our request for 6 additional positions, 1 enforcement attorney, 3 investigators, a victim advocate, and a medical director. Stephanie will testify in the House and the Senate, and then hopefully our budget will be approved. We feel cautiously optimistic that the legislature will approve our proposed budget. We have relatively low licensure fees compared to other similarly sized boards, and we have not increased our fees in 20 years. Finally, we have an order of new business. The medical board currently employs 2 full-time hearing examiners and utilizes the services of Rhonda Szymanski, a private attorney, for contract hearing examiner services as the need arises. Historically, we have an annual contract with Ms. Szymanski that does not exceed $50,000. She's currently at $48,925. However, this year, due to factors that I will subsequently describe, we would like to amend Ms. Szymanski's contract to $68,925. Contracts over $50,000, which are not competitively bid, must be approved by the controlling board. Due to the pandemic and delays in fiscal year 20, the board's hearing unit is experiencing an increasingly heavy caseload this year, with many of the cases resulting in complex multi-day hearings. The hearing unit has 55 days of hearings scheduled during the first half of 2021 as compared to 20 days during the first half of last year. Additionally, there's been a drastic increase in the number of prescribing standard of care cases, which are notably complex. The hearing unit currently has 12 of these cases on its docket as compared to 4 during all of last year. The board's current hearing process timeline does not allow for a transition of work or training to bring another hearing examiner up to speed during the current fiscal year. Ms. Szymanski has years of familiarity with the board's hearing processes and has the experience necessary to seamlessly take on large, complex cases without requiring additional training or assistance. Approval of this request will allow us to stay on schedule for the remainder of the fiscal year by assigning additional cases to Ms. Szymanski. Next fiscal year, we intend to seek out other qualified attorneys who can assist us in completing this work. The Finance Committee approved this motion earlier today. Is there any discussion regarding this matter? Okay. May I have a motion then, please, to recommend that the Executive Director seek controlling board approval to amend Ms. Szymanski's contract to $68,925?
So moved.
Dr. Safran and Dr. Caccarella, thank you. May I have, gosh, do we need a roll call? I guess we probably do because it's money. Roll call, please. Dr. Rothermel.
Yes.
Dr. Safran.
Yes.
Mr. Giacalone.
Yes.
Dr. Sohn.
Yes.
Myself, Michael Schottenstein, yes. Dr. Reddy.
Yes.
Dr. Johnson.
Yes.
Dr. Caccarella.
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis.
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery.
Yes.
Dr. Feibel. Oh, forgive me. Dr. Feibel was yes. Thank you. And Dr. Bechtel?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Schottenstein. And now Ms. Montgomery will give the Compliance Committee report.
Yes, we had a pretty robust half-an-hour conversation about, first of all, we had applications of 5 treatment providers and to discuss whether or not we would recommend their approval to the board. We voted to recommend the approval of UF Health Florida Recovery Center to be a one-bite provider, Parkdale Center to be a treatment provider and one-bite provider, Talbot Recovery Campus, a one-bite provider, Cleveland Clinic Alcohol and Drug Recovery Center, a treatment provider, and finally, MAR Addiction Treatment Centers as a treatment provider. And we would recommend this to the board. If this will require a motion, second, and a vote.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Benton, I don't think that requires a roll call, does it?
But just a voice
Just-
vote.
The other matter, okay, the other matter matters we talked about were the OPHP evaluations, discussing as we have over the last certainly last month particularly, responding to the cost of evaluations and whether or not the efficacy of a 1 day versus a 3 day in is just as good. Trying to collect data. Staff did a great job. Brandy did a great job putting together a memo recommending a new protocol, dividing groups into A and B. Generally, rather than just having an exception that only the massage therapist didn't have to go through a 3 day in-house referral. We broke it down into an A and B section, largely those with the more education requirements being required to go through a 3 day in-house, with those who are being paid less with less educational requirements being recommended to only go through a 1 day. I do not know if we need a motion on this or if we want to have Brandy send about the widely distributed. You already have a memo there. Does this require a motion, or can we just tell the staff, go forth and let's continue to solidify what we're doing here? Stephanie?
I think we're fine to go forward and solidify. No motion needed.
Okay. The other thing we did was a compliance statistics follow-up. We continue to discuss the quality of our tracking, particularly, and we've all talked about, do we need to put everybody on probation? If we're doing probation, are we doing real probation? Are we doing checklist probation? And checking our board orders, etc. So the staff has continued to have conversations about this. Brandy again did a very thorough memo regarding compliance statistics, and we continue to try to continue conversations with regard to the details, and I think we'll continue to talk about that to the board. Finally, we had a letter from the Medical Associates Coalition, which I think you've all read, and generally concerned about language that we have in our application, generally discussion about mental health, disclosures of mental health conditions, or even, frankly, other conditions. Also a request to open a new program similar to One Bite for Mental Health. Again, this is in its nascent stage. We will continue to study the application itself. Kim has done a national look. We tend to be in the middle at this point in terms of, are we asking on our application only for current information? Are we asking a 5-year look back? Are we asking for a 2-year look back, as some states? We tend to be sort of average at this point. I think we're going to be doing more robust data collection on that. And we are going to propose that the staff continue to look at this issue and where we should go from here, because there are some interesting conversations that we had prior to this board meeting. The executive director, the director of PHP, myself, and Brandy, among other things, is to talk about possibilities of compliance generally and what OPHP might be able to help us with, et cetera, beyond what it's doing now. So that generally is what we've talked about, and stay tuned.
Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Dr. Schottenstein will give us the FSMB Recommendations Review Committee report. Dr. Schottenstein.
All right, thank you so much. The FSMB Recommendations Review Committee met this morning, and we substantially reviewed the two major items on our agenda, one being the addition of a public member to the complaint process, and the other being the establishment of a quality assurance committee. And so right now we're holding off on a change in draft language until there's more clarity in terms of the nature of the role that we have that we have envisioned for the public member. I think that in general, we'd like to keep proposed language as general as possible to give us maximum flexibility in terms of how things proceed. And in that regard, it seems like the overall consensus of the committee was that even though in an ideal world it would be nice to have a public member involved in all aspects of all of the complaints, that really there's a bandwidth problem there, and that we're probably right to start with sexual misconduct, which is our chief concern, and then possibly, depending on how that goes, expand further. And so, in that regard, our thought also was to, insert the public member into the process, by and large, where the secretary and supervising member touch the process as well, with the possible exception of subpoenas. And we also reviewed the recusal process. Right now, if, how shall I say, if a licensee has complaint A and a board member is involved in the investigatory process for complaint A with that licensee, then what happens is if one day down the road complaint B comes along that has nothing to do with complaint A, that board member, the way we do it right now, is still recusing from the process on complaint B. And so I do think it's right that if a board member is involved in the investigation of complaint A, that board member should recuse from complaint A matters. I also think that if a board member is involved in complaint A and complaint B comes along and complaint B is relevant to complaint A, still makes sense to me at least, that the board member remain recused. But I think if complaint B comes along and it's separate from complaint A, I don't know that we, couldn't have the board member involved with complaint A still participate in that new complaint B. So that's sort of what we talked about with regard to the regard to the recusal process. And then we also talked about the QA process regarding closed complaints and requests to reopen closed complaints. And, staff is going to come back to us with some language, not just, I think, for, recusal issue, but also some protocols for the potential quality assurance committee going forward. Are there any questions about any of that? Okay, so that concludes my report. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Schottenstein. Dr. Safran will address the licensure committee business.
Thank you, Dr. Bechtel. Today, for board consideration, we have 7 licensure requests. Information on each of the requests has been prepared by the licensure staff and distributed to the board members. Does any board member wish to consider any of these applications separately? Seeing no one, do I hear a motion to approve the licensure staff recommendations for the requests of Kelly Ackard, Wendy Cunningham, Cynthia Devon, Allison Graves, Andreas Magriel, MD, Michelle Speck, and Garnetta Williams?
Move.
Second, Dr. Caccarella.
Second by Dr. Caccarella, and Mr. Giacalone was the motion made by.
It wasn't me.
I'm sorry.
It was me, Dr. Johnson.
Oh, okay, Dr. Johnson, thank you. Is there any discussion? A roll call vote, Dr. Rothermel,
Yes.
Dr. Saffron, yes. Mr. Jackalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Mr. Ganadakis.
He is not present at this time.
Okay. Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and Dr. Bechtel.
Yes.
I just want to take a moment to say something about licensure. Stephanie made a nice pitch for the licensure staff, but when I started on the board, licensure took in excess of 90 days to get an average license. Now it takes less than 2 weeks. Pretty special. Pretty special. Thank you very much, and this ends the report of licensure.
Thank you, Dr. Saffron. Next on the agenda, please turn to the compliance section. And we have some reinstatement requests. The first request is from Susan D. Lawrence, DO. Do I hear a motion to approve and request the reinstatement of the license of Susan D. Lawrence, DO, effective immediately, subject to the probationary terms and conditions as outlined in the February 13th, 2019 board order for a minimum of 5 years? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Schottenstein and second, Dr. Cacarella. And now we'll have a roll call vote. Dr. Rothermel,
Yes.
Dr. Saffron.
Can we say yes?
Oh,
Okay.
For reinstatement?
No, I
So-
think you should abstain. Thank you.
I'll
oh,
abstain.
okay. Pardon me, abstain.
Dr. Saffron.
Yeah, this will work.
Abstain.
Mr. Gacalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and Dr. Bechtel, I'll need to abstain. Next is Scott R. Weldon, MD. Do I hear a motion to approve the request for the reinstatement of the license of Scott R. Weldon, MD, effective immediately, subject to the probationary terms and conditions as outlined in the June 12th, 2019 board order for a minimum of 5 years? Do I have a motion?
So moved, Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson and then Dr. Johnson second. Have a roll call. Dr. Rothermel,
Abstain.
Dr. Saffron,
Abstain.
Mr. Gacalone,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Cacarella,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and Dr. Bechtel. I will abstain. Now we'll go to office conference reviews. Do I hear a motion to approve the compliance staff's reports of conferences for January 11th and 12th of 2021? I'll need a motion.
So moved,
Dr.
Dr.
Castro.
Dr. Cockerell and Dr. Schottenstein, thank you. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. At this time, we'll consider the probationary requests in today's agenda that have been prepared by the Standards Review and Compliance staff and distributed to the board members. The providers include Julie M. Alderson, DO, Michael T. Bangert, MD, Matthew D. Bauer, DO, David M. Burkans, MD, Thomas J. Gantner, PA, Stephen T. House, MD, Vernon D. Reynolds, DO, and Arthur H. Smith, MD. Before asking for a motion, does any board member wish to consider a probationary request separately? Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve the secretary and supervising members' recommendations for probationary requests? I need a motion, please.
So moved, Dr. Johnson.
Dr. Johnson and Dr.
Background.
And roll call vote, Dr. Rothermill,
Abstain.
Dr. Saxon,
Abstain.
Mr. Gacaloni,
Yes.
Dr. Soin,
Yes.
Dr. Schottenstein,
Yes.
Dr. Reddy,
Yes.
Dr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Montgomery,
Yes.
Dr. Feibel,
Yes.
and Dr. Bechtel, I will abstain. That concludes the February 10th, 2021 meeting of the State Medical Board of Ohio. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Dr. Cockrell.
I think half the board just moved that, but Dr. Caccarella and then Dr. Stone's second. And
Everybody said.
say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. And the time is
This
1:40.
conference is no longer being recorded.
Does our next meeting is with the I think the marijuana committee. Does everybody want to take like a 5 or 10 minute break before the
Yes.
meeting?
Yeah, that would be good.
A 10-minute break or?
Yes.
We have scheduled to start at 2:00.
Start at 2 o'clock.
2:00.